first thing to say is we've been working on this since the beginning of January, so that there's been a lot of scientists working on this, mathematical modelers, epidemiologists, virologists, clinicians, and the advice we've got is trying to lay out a path so we do the right thing at the right time, and there are more things to come, obviously. One of the reasons that we've done what we did yesterday is that's one of the impacts you can have, which is the biggest. So if you ask people with mild symptoms, either a cough, new persistent cough, or a temperature of 37.8 or above, to stay at home for a week, that is very effective in terms of reducing some of the speed of transmission. If you go to the other measures that have been proposed, which will come along, including potentially households having to do the same for 14 days if one person gets ill, and then protecting the very elderly and vulnerable during the period of peak transmission, so when the peak's actually occurring, those are the things which are the most impactful. And when you put mass gatherings against that, it's much less impactful as a way of stopping transmission. So is it something that should be considered? Yes, and we've looked at it and we'll continue to look at it. Is it the most important thing you can do? Far from it. There are other things that we need to get on top of, and they're quite disruptive things that we've already suggested doing. Those are the things we need to concentrate on to really get on top of this. Important things we can do are the things that make the biggest difference, and that's where we need to put our effort to make sure that those are the things that really get on top of it. And my job is to make sure that the science advice from the groups of academics and others working on this is properly presented to government, and then obviously ministers need to decide which actions they wish to take. But you're much more likely to catch this from a friend, somebody close to you, somebody you're with, a relative, somebody nearby in an enclosed environment than at a big open gathering. And so when we think about changes to gatherings, it's really not as simple as just saying get rid of the very big ones. You need to think, what do you want to try and achieve in terms of so-called social distancing, which would extend beyond just thinking about very big gatherings. Well, I'll come back to the point that the most... Well, I mean, John has often got lots of strong opinions on these things, and I respect them, and it's important to hear all of the diverse opinions on this. It's also important to recognise that my job is very simple, and that's to speak scientific truth to power. And I'm going to do that at all times. I'm going to make sure that the science advice that we've got from many, many respected scientists is properly put forward, and that's clear. And I think the government has actually listened very carefully to the advice that's coming forward. And in many ways, in terms of trying to make sure that we do this in the right way, we get ahead of it, we lay out the path, which is what we're doing, and we take the right actions at the right time. That is much better.
Why?
I don't think the science advice is different, actually. I think the science advice, so for example, if you take the thing of mass gatherings, I don't think people would disagree with the position around the relative importance of mass gatherings versus other decisions you could make. That's different from saying I want to take a decision to ban them, and it's obviously quite a relatively actually easy thing to do that. Much more difficult to do the sorts of things we're talking about now, which are much more impactful, and that's what we need to concentrate on getting done. You want to make sure the most important things get done properly and done quickly. Doesn't mean that the other things can't be done as well at some point, and certainly those are all under review the whole time, and the evidence will change as the epidemic progresses. I'm absolutely concerned that with a big peak over a short period, any healthcare system in the world can be swamped by this, and that's very clear. I think the NHS is working round the clock to make sure that they're focusing on the really important things, which are the respiratory support, so the ventilator beds, the ability to give intensive care unit support, and that's really where the focus is, because it's that part of the system that's going to come. And I know that they're looking very hard to make sure they get it there. So we're doing a twin track thing. They're looking to make sure they've got the right resources. We're trying to make sure that the advice that's given flattens the peak and broadens it, so that you don't end up with too much demand at any one time. And that's really the mitigation phase of this. Make sure you've got the right resources there to deal with it, and make sure the demand for it is as low as it can be and spread out across the period. And that's the approach we're taking.